Welcome to the Starting Point Education Channel. My name is Loretta Depka, and I'm here with Pat Obst, one of our therapists here at the Starting Point in Haddon Township, New Jersey. We are talking tonight about doing grief well. This is the fifth in a series of podcasts. I encourage you all to visit us on our YouTube channel so you can experience the rest of these, as well as other topics that may be of interest to you. Tonight, we are doing grief well, specific topic, unrecognized losses we experience throughout our lives. On Pat Obst's website, she says, loss comes in many forms: the loss of a job, loss of your home, loss of childhood stability and safety, loss of a relationship due to estrangement caused by conflict, just to name a few, can throw your life into literal and emotional chaos and confusion. Boy, Pat, that's a lot.
Awful.
So why don't we talk about, why don't you start with describing the difference between individual and collective losses that may be unrecognized?
So the main recognized loss is somebody dies, right? And then, we kind of have an idea that if somebody goes through a divorce, there's some sort of loss there, right? They're losing a person. Most people don't recognize, but it is a loss when we've had a significant life-changing illness or injury. Those are the other podcasts that I've done and that will be coming up on the site. But then there's, what about all the other stuff? The stuff that we don't get bereavement time off from work for, the stuff that people, don't want to hear us complaining about or whatever. So I wanted to cover that sort of miscellaneous category, right? So the loss of a job. I mean, what do you lose with a job? What about the ripple effect, right? Your finances, your security, your identity, maybe. Okay, so those are some of the losses that go along with that. The loss of your home could be due to foreclosure, could be, an elderly person, maybe who is having to move into a facility or in with their children. My mother-in-law went through that. It was hard for her to give up her home that she raised her children in. And
Absolutely.
The loss of childhood stability and safety. A lot of people don't even realize that they experience losses way early in their lives, that those were losses. When you grew up in a dysfunctional family, I've had people who say, my parent was strewn out on the floor, passed out from alcohol, and I had to step over them after I made my own lunch and go to second grade, myself. Well, there's like safety and security lost there. And a lot of times people don't even recognize, and they're reacting to that in their lives as an adult. So, those past wounds. Loss of a relationship due to estrangement. The person is here, but we're no longer talking. Well, it feels like they died, but again, we're not getting bereavement days. I had someone who lost her sister due to a conflict when her mother died. So she had the loss of her mother. Okay, everybody recognized that. She got bereavement days for that. Mm-hmm. But she also lost her sister because there was such contention over the estate that she lost her sister in the process. Well, she didn't get any bereavement days for that. So it's those types of, and there's many more that I could list, but so those are the individual type losses that we can go through. The collective is something like COVID, right? Where everybody's experiencing some sort of impact of that. And what have we lost? We lost what our sense of normalcy was. We lost connection with people. We lost the freedom to go where we want and to choose to do what we want. Some people lost their identity because, grandparents who couldn't hug their grandchildren, and if they're little ones, they're not going to sit in front of a FaceTime, right? So their grandparenthood identity got challenged there. If somebody lost their job due to COVID, a lot of people, their job is part of their identity. Sports, right? Schools couldn't do sports. So, if somebody identifies themselves as an athlete,
Right.
Now that kind of messes with your head. Other, collective loss from COVID, security as far as like, where are we safe? Who is safe? Can I be around this person? Can I? Should I ask if they're vaccinated or shouldn't I? Those sorts of things. What are the rules? We lost that. We feel like we're walking on shifting sand because the rules kept changing, in part because it's new and we need time for research and whatnot, right? So those are the losses that we experienced with this collective pandemic.
And how do we, I guess the real question is, how do we heal from those losses? Or maybe the bigger question is, how do we deal with those losses?
Well, these types of losses, unlike, again, if somebody dies, everybody keeps, asking how you're doing. They're sending you flowers, all that sort of stuff, right? Where with these unrecognized losses, you're not getting that generally. And so we have to kind of heal on the go. We can't take that time off. We still have to be, functioning normally. That doesn't mean we don't have to function normally if we have a job and, our mother just died. But there's a little bit of like, a lot of people who I have who are either going through a divorce or have lost a loved one to death. Like a lot of them say to me, my employer is great. My boss is great. My coworkers are great. They cover for me. My boss is great. He lets me leave early. Those kinds of things are happening, right? You get a little bit of support around those kinds of losses. These unrecognized losses, both because we don't recognize their losses when they happen to us, for one, and other people don't recognize that they're a loss. Right. So they don't give us the support we need. So we have to heal on the go, as I put it.
That makes perfect sense.
Right. So what does that mean? We have to find a way to function in the midst of it. And one of the ways that, one of the things that I teach people to do is to almost like make appointments with themselves of when they're going to think about these things. On my drive to work.
I love that.
Home from work, that's what I'm going to, or on my lunch break, that's what I'm going to think about that. So that your brain knows, okay, because otherwise it's going to keep infiltrating into our brain, right? So if we kind of mentally set aside time, then maybe our brain will leave us alone.
That would be nice.
And visually, we can, take a couple deep breaths and picture ourselves putting that problem, that loss, on a shelf, in a drawer. So that visualization tells our brain, I'm going to put it away for right now, and then I'll come back to it, because we have to be able to function, right? So the healing on the go sometimes has to happen. Actually, some people, when they're in the midst of one of the recognized losses, like I have a person who's going through a divorce, so that's sort of a recognized loss. But part of the reason why she was in a relationship and stayed in a relationship that was emotionally abusive was because of the abuse that occurred when she was a child. And so part of her grieving on the go is, again, those childhood wounds and losses can be unrecognized, right? So the on the go part is she's going through a divorce. She has to continue the divorce proceedings, all of that. But she's also allowing herself in the midst of that process to recognize, wow, all this stuff that I'm dealing with my divorce, I see why I stayed. I understand from what happened to me as a child. So she's actually, through the divorce, learning to heal the childhood wounds. And so that's another way that people kind of heal on the go.
Is there a danger on that on the go that it turns into pushing through?
Yes. Which is why a big part of doing grief well is learning to listen to ourselves. I really work with people to come up with self-awareness. I give them different exercises that help them discern how they're feeling, and then being able to address it more directly, being able to push the pause button when they need to, recognize when they need to set boundaries, recognize when they do need to take that day off from work, even though it's not going to be called a bereavement day.
Right.
So that self-awareness is really important, so that you don't just push through. You need to give yourself, set aside some, what I call sacred time, where you're acknowledging that it's a loss. It's unrecognized, right? Now, hopefully, after people listen to this podcast, they'll say, wow, I didn't realize that me going through this and that was a loss. So in the future, hopefully, they'll recognize and actually allow themselves to be sad. And they'll recognize that the reason why they're so tired is because they're grieving.
Well, the visual, Pat, for me, I'm just sitting here listening to what you said, put it in the drawer, and then when you have that time, you take it out again. I really like that. I've got that visual right there now.
Mm-hmm. But you say, all right, I've got to do this project.
Right.
But like I said, I got a 20-minute commute on the way home. That's when I'm going to cry. I'm going to do what I need to do. I kind of did that when I was, and this was not for I guess it was a loss in progress. My mother had been determined terminally ill with cancer. So I guess that would be an unrecognized loss, because nobody said that as a loss, but it was already starting in my head, right? So I was at college, and I had classes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I was at home on the weekends, and every single week, all the way in, and I guess it was a 45-minute drive, all the way into school, I cried over my mom. And then on Thursday when I left, cried all the way home. But when I was there at school, I was present for school.
And it sounds like when you were home on the weekend, you were there for your mom.
Well, I wish I was, but I wasn't. I was young, and I couldn't deal with. And that's a big lesson on a podcast on forgiveness, where we just focus on forgiveness.
I like that idea. That's a good idea.
But because I was young and I really didn't know. Now today, certainly I would be right by my mother's side every moment, but I couldn't even wrap my head around losing my mother. And I had a boyfriend, so I spent more of my time with my boyfriend. So I had to work through my own guilt around that.
But isn't that what you're supposed to do when you're young, regardless?
Yes. But I would, if I had someone young in my office in their 20s, My mother died when I was 24. If I had somebody young in my office whose parent was dying, I would encourage them to have a balance.
There you go.
Again, pay attention. How much, small doses, right? Don't hang out with your mother all the time, but be present. And then go take a break, and, how to balance that. I didn't know how to do that when I was younger.
But I thought in the previous podcast, we talked about that primitive brain. You were under 26, so that primitive
Yes.
brain doesn't know.
No, it does not, which is why, forgiveness is a wonderful thing. And we can, again, we definitely need to do.
I wrote it down. Pat. We're doing one on that.
Right. So one podcast is going to be on forgiveness of others, and the other podcast will be because that's how much time it takes to deal with that.
Sure.
That's that sort of, it's almost like compartmentalizing.
Sure.
When you have to grieve on the go, you have to learn how to compartmentalize. But that takes awareness. That takes, how am I feeling? Can I push through or not? No, I can't push through. I need to take a break. Or, yeah, you know what? I can put that on the shelf and push through. And then, so that you're still giving it its due diligence. You're still giving it its time. You're not just ignoring it or stuffing it because it's unrecognizable, because nobody else is going to treat it seriously. And then we end up not treating it seriously. You see?
So we minimum.
Not one of the big three.
Minimalize it, correct?
Yes, good word. Minimalize it, because it's not one of the big three: divorce, death, illness.
Okay.
Okay, it's not one of the big three. Therefore, it's not a loss. Okay.
Got it.
So, so that's why that's important to give ourselves the time. I think we're on question 4.
So because these types of losses can make us feel confused, in limbo or unsafe, how do we begin to heal in the midst of uncertainty?
Right. So not only are we trying to heal on the go, but there's a lot of, limbo, right? Control what we can. I have women who are going through difficult divorces, and so that's one of the big three, right? But one that's unrecognized is, oh my God, where am I going to live? Right now they're in limbo about money, home, those losses, right? That certainty, that security. So I encourage them to control what they can. It helps us to stabilize. So mindfulness is a part of that. Mindfulness, simple decisions like recognizing that we're making a choice about what we're going to wear to work today. Don't just get dressed and run out the door. I'm choosing what I'm going to wear to work today. I'm choosing whether or not I'm going to make my own coffee or stop at Starbucks. So I'm choosing what I'm doing with my money, even if I don't know what's going to happen with money in my divorce. You see, even if we don't know, another loss that happens that people don't consider a loss is the security of their children. Right? What we feel for our kids, what can we control? We can control spending time with our children. We can control going to their games like we always did. Like, just because everything's in chaos, it feels like everything's in chaos. Not everything is. There are some things that are still the same. I still eat eggs on Monday and oatmeal on Tuesday. You see what I'm saying? I still have this friend and that friend. It's getting ourselves grounded again. If we're, if we like music or art or meditation or exercise, those kinds of things can make us feel like, okay, for these 20 minutes that I'm doing yoga, I know where I am and know what I'm doing.
Right.
It gets us, it puts us kind of in the eye of the hurricane where it's calm for a little bit.
Because you can't control anything else.
Well, right, because most of the time we feel like we're on those outer bands of the hurricane.
Right. Exactly.
So part of what we need to do in the work that I do with people is, okay, let's find what makes you come to that eye of the hurricane and feel grounded and feel like it's something that you can control. Another way to deal with, the confusion and the feeling unsafe is stay open to the possibilities. We can get so caught up in the fear or the anger of, let's say, an estranged, because of conflict, an estranged family member or whatever. We need to stay open to the possibilities of other people maybe coming into our lives who they won't replace that sister, but they can be sister-like. And the same way with if we lose our home, right? Open to the possibilities, like if an elderly person, okay, so I'll just give you the example of my mother-in-law. She didn't want to lose her home. It took us a while to kind of convince her that she wasn't going to be able to go back. She was too ill. And we built an addition on the house. Sad, she had to grieve losing her home, but she stayed open to the possibilities of what she would be able to create here. And we had 2 young kids, and not long after I adopted she actually helped me through the loss of Ricky because she had lost children.
Wow.
And so she and I would cook together when I stayed home because I took some time off from work. When my son that I adopted from Guatemala, when he was old enough, he used to stand on she had one of those scooters. The jazzy chair, and it had a platform for her feet. He would stand in between, and she taught him at 2.5 years old, he learned to use a mouse and play pinochle or blackjack.
That is too funny. That's great.
Because so she was open to him,
Right.
coming. I mean, she had a whole new world when she moved here. I have a picture of her with her wheelchair with him on her lap. And here's somebody who was all crippled up with rheumatoid arthritis. So touch, her husband had died years before. So human touch was not something that happened very often with her, unless it was painful. The doctors poking and prodding, right? And here she had this little baby on her lap, all dressed in his little doggy Halloween costume. And she was dressed in something, I forget. A picture of her, we're going down to our neighbors who had a pizza party with all the kids before they went out. No, she wouldn't have had that at her house, that she stayed locked in her house, not able to move.
Exactly.
Go anywhere and do anything because she was so crippled up. So, we also have to, even if we can't see the possibility, we can't, like she couldn't see that when she moved out of her house. She couldn't see all these possibilities, these things that ended up happening.
Right.
Ricky hadn't even been, conceived and died yet, and Will adopted. But when we, as we go through that process and we accept what is, then we can all we have to do is be open to possibilities. A lot of people shut them down. I hate that I had to move, right? And
absolutely. How many conversations have we all had with older people in our lives that we go through that?
Right. They get bitter and,
that's where curmudgeon comes from, isn't it?
Yeah, there you go. but she was open, and we went right along with that. When we saw that all she was doing was watching TV, we got her that jazzy chair and we got her a computer, and she was 70 years old learning how to use a computer, playing blackjack because she couldn't go to the casino anymore.
That's too funny.
She's playing it online and teaching my son how to use a mouse.
And what a wonderful, memory you have of that.
Right, exactly. So just open. I tell people just open with curiosity and wonder. I know you're in pain, but just be open to it. You have no idea what's on the other side. Just don't be closed down.
Right. So I think that answers, in my mind, what does our perspective need to be about unrecognized losses as we move forward? Because we're going to all have them, and we're going to have them multiple times.
And sometimes several at one time, right?
Oh,
sometimes we're having
on that on anyone.
Sometimes we're having one of the big three as well as, right? Again, that's that ripple effect.
Right.
So just to kind of wrap that up, the perspective has to be that there's an acceptance that there will be more losses, right? I hear people saying, waiting for the other shoe to drop when things start to go a little bit well, right? And I say to them, stop waiting. Yes, the other shoe will drop. You need to accept that many shoes will drop. So that's part of, again, doing grief well, is we have to say, you know what, this is going to happen again and again. Therefore, I better learn how to do it well, right? Develop a self-trust. I encourage people to come up with phrases where, like, for instance, one of my phrases that I use for myself all the time is, I'll figure it out. I'll survive. I always do. 100 years, all new people. 100 years, all new people. So yes, in the micro perspective, this is a horrible thing. In the macro perspective, 100 years, all new people. It just helps me to just take a breath.
Right.
Right. So that's one of the perspectives that we can, and everybody has their own phrases, whether they're phrases that have been passed down from their parents, or people that who've been survivors, resilient people, or they develop their own. And the other thing is, we need to add our losses to the story of our lives and not see them as these things that we want to get rid of or throw away, but they're all part of the chapter of our story. And if we allow them, they'll help us grow. They'll shape who we are. So our losses don't have to define us. Our losses can actually refine us if we let them.
And make our story a little more interesting.
For some people, they're like, "Oh, it's interesting enough."
I want boring this week.
Right. But it's hard to have boring chapters. I have people who, part of the reason why they're experiencing loss after loss is because they're making bad choices, right? So why do you keep getting divorced? Why do you keep having breakups? You're making bad choices. Why are you making the bad choices? Well, if you would take the time to learn to grieve well and do some of your work to have a relationship with yourself, and maybe you wouldn't continue to create chaos, because we do, because it's familiar, especially if you grew up in a dysfunctional family. You will create chaos again and again.
Has anyone not grown up in a dysfunctional family?
There are degrees.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Right? There are degrees of dysfunction. Everybody grows up in a dysfunctional family, but certainly, some are much more damaging,
right,
than others. So the long and the short of it is, don't let your losses define who you are, especially in a negative way, but let them refine who you are. Like sort of baptism by fire. We get stronger, like metal. When it goes through the fire, it gets stronger. post-traumatic growth.
I cannot thank you enough, Pat. This has been great. And we do have to really talk about those upcoming podcasts on doing grief well, but hopefully forgiveness is one of them.
Well, and maybe I need to put this out there, and maybe we need to put it onto the Starting Point website somewhere. How about if people start leaving suggestions for other grief topics?
I think that's a great idea.
Or topics within grief, right? Things like
Grief and loss, right?
within loss and grief. What would you like me to cover?
I think that sounds great. Only if you promise me you'll do one on forgiveness.
Oh, absolutely. That's probably going to, maybe that's going to be the next group of them that we do.
Okay.
Right.
Sounds good. Pat, again, I can't thank you enough. And we look forward to being back soon. Have a great evening, everyone.